Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Angela Churie Kallhauge. I'm the Executive Vice President for Impact at the Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event. So today we're launching the Reset Network. This is a new international research and engagement network focused on just energy transitions in the Global South. This is the Africa's regional launch, and 2 additional sessions have also been held for the Americas and for Asia. So the purpose of this event is to celebrate the leadership already happening across the Global South on energy transitions, to highlight the challenges for the future, and to identify opportunities for the Reset Network to help. Now, before we start, a few housekeeping rules. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the Reset Network website. Now, during the panel discussion, we encourage you to send through your questions using the Zoom question and answer function, the Q&A function that you will see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. So we're going to start with a short video highlighting a success story from members of the Reset Network, an international dialogue on the just labor market transitions that resulted in a publication in Nature Communication. So let's take a look.
The Reset Network works on energy system transformations because we know that decarbonization is not just a technical challenge. It is I am Fernández Intriago. I grew up in Mexico City, in a country where millions of people work in the informal economy. Street vendors, small-scale farmers, domestic workers. When I started studying how climate policy affects labor markets, I kept running into the same problem. Most of the frameworks were designed for countries with formal employment, strong unions, and social safety nets. They didn't fit places like Mexico, or Nigeria, or India. We have seen across the world that climate policies can falter when institutional impacts are ignored. Rising energy prices, job insecurity, and regional decline can quickly erode public and political support. Just transition measures are not optional. They are policy enablers essential for making decarbonization politically and socially durable. One of our first major projects asked a simple question: what happened to workers when an energy system changed? My colleagues and I conducted a comparative analysis across 14 countries in the global north and south, combining economic modeling with qualitative expert input. What we found is that challenges in developing countries are fundamentally different. When half your workforce is informal, you can rely on unemployment insurance or retraining programs that assume people have formal contracts. When there's no social safety net, a mine closure doesn't just mean a career change, it can mean a family crisis. We produce a progress scale that benchmarks where countries stand on labor-focused just transition, a tool we hope other nations can use to identify their own gaps and priorities. From there, we convene an international dialogue, interviewing over 30 experts and bringing together trade unionists, labor economists, energy company veterans, and policymakers across 4 sessions. That process identified 5 key challenges, from the mismatch between where jobs disappear and where green jobs emerge, to the risk that informal workers get left out entirely, to that enormous financing gap. The results were published in Nature Communications and have been accessed over 12,000 times, which tells me it hit a nerve. But just transition goes beyond labor. It includes access to affordable energy, fair prices, strong institutions, and inclusion, especially for groups historically left out like women and informal workers. Markets matter, but they must be designed to account for equity and not just efficiency. What I have learned from this work is that Global South doesn't need adapted versions of rich country solutions. It needs its own solutions, designed by local researchers who understand the institutional capacity, the labor informality, the development priorities of their own countries. That's what the Reset Network is building, a space where those researchers connect, share tools and data, and produce the kind of evidence that can unlock climate finance, shape regulation, and give governments the confidence to move forward. Because a transition that leaves people behind isn't just not fair, it's a transition that won't last.
You're muted, Angela.
Thank you very much, and thank you for watching. So that dialogue brought together labor leaders, academics, policymakers, and practitioners from both the Global South and the North to address a critical but underexplored dimension of energy transitions. That is the impact on workers and labor markets. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the Reset Network and why we believe this work matters. The numbers on your screen tell the story. Around 3/4 of cost-effective climate mitigation must come from the Global South. Yet only about 20% of global clean energy investment flows through there, and 2/3 of the world population lives in these countries, often in energy poverty. And the last two figures exclude China. And this isn't just a climate risk, it's a massive untapped opportunity. Now you may ask, why is the investment not flowing? Next slide, please. We hear the same four challenges consistently from researchers and decision makers. Many countries lack locally tailored, transparent evidence that investors and policymakers need. And the tools being used are often closed source, meaning that countries can't own or adapt to their own planning. Technical models and economic analysis, and as well as the social impacts, tend to be siloed and advancing in parallel rather than working together. And all too often, international initiatives come in, publish, and leave without building lasting local capacity. So what is this network that we are setting up today? The Reset Network was created to fill these gaps. So Reset stands for Reimagining South-Led Energy Transition. It's an international nonprofit research and engagement network that brings together researchers and decision makers across the Global South to accelerate just energy transitions. It is coordinated by the Environmental Defense Fund and has evolved from the MSET network, which is an energy modeling initiative that was established in 2022 and that still continues as a core pillar. Importantly, Reset does not lobby for specific pathways. It provides impartial, evidence-based analysis to help inform decision makers. So the network operates through three integrated pillars. The first, the economics-based policy solutions, research and dialogue on emissions pricing, climate finance, just labor transitions, and the broader economic dimensions of energy transition. The second pillar relates to the modeling for the energy transition, open source energy planning models that are adapted to national realities, giving countries the ownership and agency over their own planning. And the third pillar relates to evaluation, the ability to assess how existing policies are working with a focus on emission pricing systems. What makes this distinctive is that these three pillars talk to each other. A country can go from model to economic assessment to policy recommendation with the local capacities, with the local researchers leading the work right through. So how do we work? Next slide. Through the South-South knowledge exchange, like when our South Africa-based team helps the Dominican Republic team build its own energy planning capacity. We also working through open source tools that countries can own and adapt, and through capacity building, through workshops, small grants, mentorships, and expert sessions. And lastly, we also work through facilitated dialogue that brings cross-sector stakeholders together. So the shared commitments that you see on this slide come from our strategy. They reflect what our members have told us matter. That is, accelerating the just transition, building local capacity, encouraging collaboration, and enabling informed decision-making. They also highlighted the need to engage diverse views and uphold the integrity of network activities. So I'd like to show you a second case study that brings many of these elements to life. And this is a story of the South-South cooperation I referenced to support the energy transition in the Dominican Republic. So may we have the video, please?
The Reset Network works on energy system transformation because we know that governments are under pressure to deliver a rapid, cost-effective energy transition. Our work in the Global South brings together credible models, transparent data, and most importantly, people with experience who know how to connect technical analysis to real policy choices. I am Rodrigo Borges. I grew up in Santiago, Chile, and I am now an environmental economist and part of the Reset Network management. Over the few decades, Chilean economists and modelers have designed and implemented green taxes, built nationally calibrated electricity models, work across government, university, and civil society. and translated complex modeling into actionable policy. Chile was a mirror that showed we could model whatever question people had and provide all the information needed to diagnose a solution. Experienced Chilean modelers work alongside the Dominican Republic Ministry of Energy and Mines and connected in local academics and technical teams. Together, we built a national electricity model, specifically for the Dominican Republic, that was calibrated against real historical data.
So the country was getting a lot of investment opportunity, but we simply did not have the tools or the software or the in-house capacity to make evidence-based policy decisions and know from all these opportunities which one is the best one in the long term. This kind of gap really was, I would say, a restriction for us. The team really helped bridge this gap by aligning our institutional needs with practical open source modeling solutions that were transparent, peer reviewable, and accessible. And honestly, we did not have the budget to go and hire consultants to analyze each one of these potential solutions.
The model we built was open, the assumptions were transparent, and we discussed the result weekly. The goal was to eventually make any external expert unnecessary. It was all about building trust.
But I think the best thing is that they helped us create like a knowledge community where there was a lot of transfer of this information. So it was not a one-time thing.
As experienced economists and modelers, we know that just transition policy must be tailored by different jurisdictions. Institutional capacity, electricity system models, and technical capability are different everywhere. Collaboration across the Global South can bridge gaps, reduce risk, improve policy credibility, and unlock international finance more quickly. The Reset Network's aims is to move beyond high-level principles and support real-world decision-making. We are building models and tools informed by experience and tailored to local situations. Our open source models are not an impenetrable black box. They are designed to build capacity and help governments connect knowledge to decisions. The experience we have had of Chile MCEP team working with Dominican Republic means we know this type of collaboration can work and will boost a just energy transition across the Global South.
Thank you very much. And as you could see, that story from the Dominican Republic shows what's possible when local capacity with international collaboration and good evidence come together. So I would like to now hand you over to my colleague, Dr. Luis Intriago, who is one of our senior economists. He will introduce the panels and guide us and moderate us through the discussion from here. Thank you so much for your attention and for your presence today. Over to you, Luis.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us today from across Africa and around the world. As Angela said, I'm Luis Fernández Intriago, an economist at the Environmental Defense Fund and part of the Reset Network management team. The story from the Dominican Republic shows what is possible when locally capacity, international cooperation, and good achievement can come together. I'm now delighted to introduce our three panelists, each bringing distinct and essential perspectives on the just energy transitions in Africa. First, Dr. Marcela Tarazona is Head of Climate Finance and Economics at Genesis Analytics. She's a climate and disaster risk economist with 20 years of experience advising governments across Africa, Asia, and Latin America on climate finance, green growth, and adaptation. Dr. Philip Kofi Adom is a professor of economics and head of the Department of Economics at Ashesi University in Ghana, and from late March will also serve as visiting professor at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. His research focused on energy transitions, efficiency, finance, and pricing in the Africa context. Lastly, and but not least, Paseka Mabina is Director for the Climate Change Mitigation Research and Analysis of South Africa's Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment. He leads the emission trajectory modeling, manages the country's sectoral emissions targets, and develops mitigation tools to support South Africa's low-carbon transition. So please, you're all really welcome. We're really excited. And as you see, it has already been a really interesting conversation, and with what presented from Angela, the two videos and so on. But first, Marcela, from your experience working on the just energy transition in the Global South, what is one success story that you can share, and what is the one challenge that you are facing?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Marcela, we stopped hearing you
Well,
right now.
it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, sorry.
I have been working focused. Should I change the phone connection or should I continue here? Let me see.
You can continue now. I think.
Okay, I'm gonna we can move to the next panel before I connect on my phone. So just let me know. I switched off my camera just to make sure that you can hear me. But I think what I wanted to share is in the last 5 years, my work has really focused on Africa. And as Luis mentioned, I worked in globally and with the background in economics and finance. So a lot of what the network is doing resonates with the work that I have been doing in the past. I also have like a strong academic and research background. So I like very much what the network is doing because I think it is essential that it's essential for providing evidence-based policy making. So, you asked me about success stories, and the way I would like to answer this question is, so I started my work in the just energy transition in South Africa, where Genesis, the company where I'm working, it's headquartered in South Africa. What I found very, very interesting, and it's something that I would like to highlight also as a key for success for the future and for other countries, is South Africa from the very beginning thought about the just energy transition not just as a mitigation strategy, but at the core for them, it was also, they took it into account in terms of adaptation, which meant really part of what you have already mentioned in videos, right? There is two big aspects that are correlated, and I think this is kind of like what is supporting still South Africa. There's a lot of analysis, which is actually at the moment led also by Genesis in terms of the socio-economic impacts of closing all the coal mines, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like that's an example of using research, using really thorough analysis, economics analysis, because we know that, of course, most affected people by the change changing the economics of South Africa to a more renewable source. It has massive impacts on the most vulnerable, in this case, the miners, right? So that's the first thing that I think it's a key for success, is taking into account serious analysis of the socioeconomic impacts of this transition and how they adapt the poor. How they affect the poor mainly, and very much related also is the work that we also, I can speak more from what I have been involved. So the other work that I think has been really interesting is, you also mentioned labor markets, right? So I think we were commissioned by the ILO a couple of years ago to do research on basically trying to understand what were the impacts of climate change on labor markets, both in terms of supply and in terms of demand, right? And this has been a framework that has been now used in Morocco, in Somalia, in Jordan, and now we're using this study with FSD Africa to produce a new study that is general for Africa to understand the trends of how is climate impacting labor markets. So I think. So in a summary, what I say is, for me, complementing the videos around the energy transition and the energy modeling is the importance of socioeconomic analysis and the impacts of this transition on most vulnerable populations. And I'm going to hand back to you, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and that's an incredible story and all the work that you have done. So thank you for that. And before continuing with the panel, I just want to remind the participants that you can submit your questions in the Q&A box. So any question that you have, please put it there so we can give it to the panelists. So next, Philip, can you please also share with us in your work in the just energy transition, what is one success story or one challenge that you are facing?
Okay, can you hear me, please?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you for having me on this important launch. So over the years, my work has, focused, let's say, significantly on the demand side. How we can actually manage, our energy demand, whilst also, addressing the carbon emission related issues. And in most of the research that we've done, one of the issues that have perhaps, strongly had always been the barriers that, individuals actually face in terms of transitioning from inefficient appliances to more efficient appliances. And over the years, what I've seen and cite my country and few others, as example in Africa, where the government has actually taken the initiative to actually distribute, especially low kits energy efficient appliances to households. For instance, in Ghana, I remember in the year 2007, the government distributed about 6 million CFL bulbs to replace, incandescent, bulbs. What that actually did is that it saved the country, 124 megawatt, electricity. So just imagine that if to generate, that power, how much money that it would have cost, the state. Currently, also what the country is also doing is again to move from the CFL to LED, bulbs. And the government have also again taken the initiative to distribute about 12 million LED bulbs to households. One of the issues that I've find here is that, when it comes to such low kits appliances, I think our governments have been doing well. But then when it comes to, appliances such as, refrigerators and all that, the transition is still quite very slow. And this, I believe, could be a combination of factors. Even though the government in the past have attempted to do some kind of a partial subsidy, but what you see is that people still do not actually transition. And one thing we need to also notice is that, people develop social and cultural ties with infrastructure and technology, right? So when you are asking them to actually transition, I mean, your funding normally, in most cases, is tied to the technology. We actually forget about, the social, the cultural ties. And that's the same thing that happened in South Africa when they tried to, take off their coal power in Mpumalanga, to be specific. What probably they forgot was that the people have lived with this infrastructure for only God knows, how many years, right? And just coming in and taking, that plant off actually meant something more than economics. So I think one of the things that we need to be thinking of is that when we are funding energy transition, the focus should go beyond just the technology, because people have actually built certain kind of cultural and social ties, which would take time. It's like a process before people can really themselves into moving to other forms of technology we want them to. Yeah, so I would pause here on that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, it resonates a lot, and it connects a lot to what we share in the paper on the just labor transitions. There's a need of understanding the people that are there, and it's not only like changing electrons, but actually ensuring that this has social license and takes into account what peoples and communities need. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really powerful message, and your other part of more like a micro level and the need of doing the slow transition is also really relevant and important. Thank you. Now, Paseka, you have a little bit the same question I would like to pose to you, but you have the perspective from the government and so on, so that brings us a different lens. So thank you so much for agreeing. And yeah, so what is one success story that you can share on the just energy transition and one challenges that you're facing? So please, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity and greet all the attendees and my fellow panelists. It has been a great, an insightful discussions that came out of you, and I was actually quite, quite derailed to say everything that I'm going to talk about. You guys have already addressed. But then, from the government perspective, let us look into what is it that we are trying to address in this particular case. There are three triple challenges that South Africa is facing, right? And I believe this is resonating to most of the developing countries. Firstly, the three triple challenges we're talking about: the poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So, under these auspices of these three triple challenges, and talking about the just transition, then it means that we need to emphasize a lot in terms of the just transition and not just do it in a Russia way, but then understanding what are the components that really would get us into a point whereby we say it is a just energy transition. And firstly, the question to say that what has South Africa done? What has South Africa done to actually implement the just transition? One thing that is very important for us to note it is that the institutional and governance, right? So we have the institutional capability and maybe the alignment in terms of the institution. This includes the policy development. I'm coming from the government, as you have mentioned, that the policies that we have developed within the government, are they really addressing the just transition? I'll take a typical example of which is one of the work that we are championing and my unit is championing, which is the Climate Change Act, the implementation of the Climate Change Act. One of the most component, or maybe one of the emphasis of that, it is the socio-economic aspects of the act itself, to say that as much as we want to reduce the carbon footprint, but then it must be done in a just, or maybe we must consider the socio-economic aspects of it. The second one that I'm going to talk about, which is also being facilitated, or maybe this which is led by other the government entity, it is what you call the IRP. We have recently have had the integrated resource plan. It's called the integrated resource plan that was tabled earlier this year, that talks about how much, or maybe how are we going to how much the South Africa energy mix will be, on how it will be in 2030. And I can tell you that from 2020, early 20s, where you had the South African energy mix, maybe perhaps dominated by coal. That was like 90%, almost over 95% that was dominated by coal. But then to where we will be in the 2030, which is close to 27% to 30%, you can just really look into the improvement that the country is doing and it will be doing. Currently, as I'm talking to you, there is quite a number of the projects that are already in developing. But not only that, but this is basically important that we engage, because I spoke about the institutional governments. The second one was the institutional and governance. The second one, it is the stakeholder engagement. We are not just saying that we are going to do the just transition without people being part of it. As a government entity, we are saying that transparency and inclusion of the people, it is very important. And this is basically how we have been engaging with different entities, and also together to say that how then do we develop or maybe create these other platforms, like the organization like the PCC, the Presidential Climate Change Commission, which is leading a lot in terms of the just energy transition, together with the PMU under the presidency, to look into some of these projects. So this is basically how South Africa has been championing this. But then, however, your last question was that what has been the challenge? Which is very, very important, because I believe the challenge also is a similar challenge with other developing countries, which is the climate finance, the finance part of it, the investment part of it, which is something that we really need to address, because there is projects that we want to undertake. There is a leeway or maybe even the vision. We already have a vision. We already have the trajectory. This is already something that we already have done. And also the investment plans. We have done the investment plan into that. We submitted our NDCs. We are already developing some of the works like a revision of our long-term load development strategy. So all that, it has to be costed. And that costing, the question it is that where will the money come from? Of which our participation here, it is quite important because we want to escalate this discussion to say that how then do we bring all these particular entities together and talk about the just transition component of the finance? I think I tried by all means to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really like incredible to see the perspective from South Africa and how you have been trying to lead, since the beginning, try to lead on the just energy transition, and that's really impactful. And what you were saying of the finance model and so on, that's something that actually part of what we evolved from being the MSET network, that was a modelers group and network. We want to go a little bit more and to get more into policy and finance and all these important issues of how finance should flow from global north to global south and so on. And that's really relevant. And I think it's a question that we need to address more. And there's another case study in our website on climate finance from our director Susie Kerr and Chan Hu, that I invite you to read, but we can share it after. But yeah, thank you so much for that really good overview of where it stands. So this is a question for the three of you. I think we already start hinting a little bit, but how great engagement between researchers and decision makers help, and what is one of the things that you can offer from your experiences, both of being from both sides. I mean, Philip is from the academia, you from the government, Marcela is from the NGO community, and so on. So what are the how the research could help solve of these issues, and how it has to interact with the decision makers, and how we should put that on front for research. So Marcela, please, if you may.
Thank you. I'm going to try with the video. Is it working this time? Can you hear me?
If you want to share a video, you either...
No. Can you see my video?
Yeah.
I'm just
Perfect.
checking the connection. Okay. So, I mean, I think the interventions from my fellow panelists have been amazing, and I think we are all pointing to very similar things, which is really inspiring. I mean, of course, I'm more familiar with the South Africa case, and I think it's, yeah, I think we're the way that it was phrased around justice, I think is key, and I think as economists and as people working in development, the word justice, it's what makes it like so interesting. It's not just around energy systems. It's not just about clean energy, right? But it's about the people who are affected. So I think I have two big answers, or I don't know if it's two or three. I mean, to your question, I think areas of engagement, and what we have seen in Genesis, the demand for is tools and frameworks. So it's kind of like, what is the bridge between all the research, all the evidence, and then how to translate that into something that speaks to a decision maker. So what is the information that we need to make the decisions, right? So that I think is the best, the thing that I always hear from working with governments, decision makers, is like tools, frameworks, so ways to interpret the data in a way, and the results and the evidence in a way that is useful for us as decision makers. I mean, just to give you an example of this, I mean, now we're doing a research project in Morocco in which our work is we're developing a tool that allows investors to assess whether their NDC projects, so projects that are listed in their NDCs, I mean, or come out of the investment plans for the NDCs, whether they have the just transition element, right? So they may be energy projects, right? But there's a tool that assesses this justice and how to improve that in the project. So I think that's an example in which that's a tool that in a way brings all the principles of justice, etc., into an investor that is trying to make an investment in energy, but wants to make sure that there is the just transition. The second one alludes to also the comment that was made about financing. I think financing has been, in the 5 years of working in Africa, where we have concentrated our efforts has been on the financing. And the financing, rightly so, what I think research and tools, again, are very, very in demand is there might be an NDC plan, and it's there, and everyone has agreed and it has been submitted. But between that and the implementation and the real just energy transition, there's a huge gap. So what we are supporting, and I think where research can bring that, is again a tool. So what we're doing is, okay, you have your investment plan, but you have to cost it, right? So all the costing techniques, creating databases in which we can identify the costing of different technologies, different impact, the impacts, et cetera. Then prioritization. What is most urgent? What should be done first? What can wait, et cetera. And this information actually creates a link to financing sources, right? Once I know what is my urgent investment, what is the cost of it, I can also think, is this an investment that speaks to private sector? Is this an investment that actually is of no interest to the private sector? So you would then need to look into public sector funding, which can be international, national, or you can explore philanthropic funding, right? So that you de-risk the investment and you make the next projects or phases of the transition interesting to the private sector, right? So I think that's the fundamental role that academia has is in research. I think applied research is, okay, we understand the impacts and we spoke about the socioeconomic impacts quite a lot, but I think there's these tools into how do I make sure that a project is just, it has this just transition component. And then the second one, as I said, is really how do I make this implementation plan, in which South Africa has made massive progress. And many of the countries working in their NDCs, they translate into implementation plans, but then they need to have the costing, they need to have the prioritization, how to prioritize, and what goes, and the phasing, right? What goes first, et cetera, and what are the sources of funding, what should be the focus of public sector funding, and what is the role of anyone else. So basically, how do I attract then private sector in a later stage by de-risking all the investments? I'm going to hand back to you, Luis, and I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that initial piece of the tools and frameworks, that's something that is really implementable, and that's how we started with the switch model and so on, to give something that is actually useful for the policymakers and to implement and use and think and so on. And yeah, the finance is really relevant to have it. And I think it is something that we're coming back, but it has to be, as you said, to incorporate the private sector is important to the risk and so on. So in some sense, I think there's a lot of things here that we can learn. Thank you so much. And then, Philip, what is your take on how creating engagement between researchers and decision makers help? And yeah, what is one insight from your experience? You're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now, please?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. So I think this is a very important question, which I would say in recent have become very, very, very important, because normally when you meet policymakers, they will tell you, yeah, you guys, you are doing very interesting, work, but they are not decision relevant, right? And as researchers, we normally tackle ourselves with the fact that what we are doing is interesting and policy relevant, right? But in most cases, it doesn't happen like that. One of the ways that I have seen, which has actually worked, is try to co-produce the idea together, right? So that it's not like the whole thing is emanating from one side. So when you have this need base, trust me that, it generates the interest from the other party to actually work, on. So that is one thing that we need to pay attention to. The other thing that I would emphasize is, normally I'm an economist, so we bother so much about outcomes, how some interventions affect some socioeconomic outcomes, and all that. But sometimes we miss out on the mechanisms, why things are not working, why things are working. What are the potential implementation challenges that probably a policy face and all that. Our questions normally do not go in that direction. But these are the things that the practitioners, I believe, would want to find answers to. I'm very sure that almost countries have an idea on some kind of energy transition framework. But what they are not too sure of is whether this would work. What are the potential risks, associated with, let's say, going with that and, and all that. So I think that if our research, could go beyond just the outcomes and begin to interrogate, why a policy may work, why a policy may fail, what the implementation conditions, of a particular policy could be, I think those things could be more decision relevant than what we normally, busy ourselves with. Yeah. So I'll just stick to these two main so that my other colleague can also come on board.
Yeah, that co-creation part is super important, and that's something that we notice, like when we start giving grants at the MSET network, and then we're planning to do in the future for research work network. We noticed that sometimes there was a disconnection between what the researchers were doing and like thinking of the optimal path or whatever, but like that wasn't necessarily connected to what like the policy makers actually needed. So in some sense, for us, what we started to do, and I'm really happy that you brought it, is they have to show engagement before submitting the proposal. They have to come together with the policymakers and other stakeholders to actually show us that their research is relevant for others and not only for them. So co-creation, I think, is something really important, and it actually comes a little bit of Paseka was mentioning before on co-creation also of the policies with the people that is affected. So co-creation is a word that is really embedded into what we do, and I think it's really important. Now moving to you, Paseka, you from the other side again, thinking about how do you cooperate with like the researchers and with academia and so on. So how can greater engagement between researchers and decision makers like yourself? What is one insight that you can offer of your experience?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the question. And I think my fellow panelists have already done justice to the question, but I will try by all means to take a different turn as well to say that from the policy development, what is very important, it is the stakeholder engagement, right? And in most of the cases, the stakeholder engagement will involve different entities. You are having researchers, you have civil societies, you have even the youth and the human organizations, you are having research institutions that I mentioned, the public universities, and also the institutions that we've had, like the CSIR in South Africa, and other institutions. So the importance of that from our side, it is just not mainly about ticking the box to say that we have already engaged with this. That's why this policy needs to be implemented, because we already have that. But then not only that, but one thing that is very important, it is the skills transfer within that, because the researchers and the institutions, they teach. And in most of the cases, we are talking about the skills that are being the reskilling of the people, and we have the young people coming into the industry that is changing. How then do we make it a point that the institutions that are teaching, which is other universities in this particular point, they already incorporate all the changes, or maybe where we see the low carbon economy to be going into, incorporated within their syllabuses and all other streams of the research. So that is a component that is very important to say that as much as we as a policymakers, we are making it the point that we unlock the opportunities for the low economy, the low economy or low economy industry, or maybe future. But one thing that is very important is for us to highlight that there will be skill set that is being incorporated. And how then do we get to emphasize the capacity building, the technological transfer to make it a point that we are ready as we are moving towards the low economy. And I think other my fellow panelists have already touched based on the importance of that. But one thing for us that is important, it is that coordination, it is very important. And we are not really saying that we are going to talk to the institutions or maybe even the stakeholders towards the end. No, during the process of policy development, they are forming part of the engagements from the starting point up until the end point. We understand that different entities and the different institutions or stakeholders may have different objectives. But one thing that is very important as a policymaker, it is that how then do we get to be a point whereby we find a common ground and develop policies that are very coherent, that are very inclusive, and also that are just. And that is very important to bring everybody and each and every stakeholder, depending on the site at which they are, but then to find a common ground. And that is very important. The technological transfer, the skills development, it is very, very important as we are leading into the low economy future, the low carbon economy. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, sometimes we forget that there are many more stakeholders that are really important. And yeah, I mean, research and policy making is really important, but bringing other stakeholders to the table is also really relevant. And also, as you said, like developing skills and so on is really, really important. And yeah, thank you for that. And I see I'm looking at right now at the questions from the audience. Thank you so much that they are coming. So the first one, I think is for all of you. So whoever feels confident, like please let me know who wants to answer. In the Pan-African context, do you see local energy production and ownership as an area of growth of source of just energy distribution, such as community solar networks, hyperlocal hydro systems? Why and why not? This is from Derek Tepe. Anybody feel? If you want to read the questions also in the Q&A box.
Yeah, please, could you repeat the questions, or it's in the chat?
Yeah, do you see local energy production and ownership as an area of growth or source of just energy distribution? So he's mentioning things related to community solar networks, hyperlocal hydro systems, and why do you think about that, and why not it would be something that could help the just energy distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly once we talk about energy, justice, one of the things that is very crucial is the context uniqueness. And therefore, if there's that local capacity to develop own resources, what happens is that, people relate to that more than when the idea seems to be kind of, imported, right? So if it's something that is around their surrounding and they see it, being developed, in terms of, participation, it will be much easier than if, say, a technology is actually imported. In most cases, people rather see that as some kind of a risk. It's like you are trying to come and take my place, of some form. So I would say that if the resources is there to develop, local resources, that definitely would help address a lot of some of these, social constraints and barriers that we normally see currently happening with the transition process.
We have another question from Joao Gonzalez that says, are there a difference on how state-owned enterprise and privately owned enterprise conduct labor transition? Are there examples coming from research done in the Global South about this topic? I mean, before taking the moderator's prerogative, there's some examples of that. For example, Uruguay was like an example that we had in the panel yesterday on Americas. So I invite you, and that was like a state-owned, completely energy transition, and it was really smooth. And it was like and it was really interesting because they now basically have a completely clean grid. But that's, I mean, that's an example, but I think there are others. And yes, understanding the difference between like state-owned versus privately owned is really important. But I don't know if any of the panelists wants to reflect on that. If not, I'm happy to continue the conversation afterwards, Joao. And that's something that we are like thinking of a continuation of the work that we already did in the Network Communications Just Labor Transitions paper. So I will keep you tuned and posted. So there's another question. This is for Marcela. I would love more information on the tool for checking just transition elements against NDC projects. Is that tool that you can share? Or perhaps could you give us examples on how justice elements are articulated? These types of tools could be really useful across all development sectors. I work in agriculture in particular.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, just to give you an idea of how it works, but I'm happy to share a bit more separately. So we have the tool has two parts, and one of them is looking at impacts. The second one is looking at principles. So basically, the first one is asking questions about whether the project has taken into account the impacts, right? Like, and there's specific questions, right? I mean, just to say, applies. The idea is that we're testing it right now, and the idea is that this is applicable to all sectors, so of course, including agriculture. So as I said, first around the impact, specific impacts, questions about impacts, and identifying who are the people affected by those impacts, right? So that the project has knowledge of who is going to be impacted by that. And then there's a second part of the tool, which is about the principles, right? So this is based around like principles such as gender, the youth, spatial justice, and kind of like decent employment, right? So what we have done in that case, because this is a tool specific for Morocco, has to align the just transition principles in the country, right? And it could be different for different countries, right? I think in South Africa it would be a little bit different. And then we design questions that are around whether the project has taken into account these specific principles. I mean, it's been a long process, and we've made it quite simple at the end. It's kind of like very like simple questions, but it's a way for a project to reflect to which extent they have taken that into account. Back to you, Luis.
Thank you so much. And yeah, there's a comment there in the chat. Like, I think Paseka, you should read this about the situation in South Africa and so on. But it is like a little bit. I think it's more like expressing from Molindi his thoughts on the energy transition in South Africa, and the importance of ensuring and having the industrial policy and ensuring protection of for local industry and jobs. I don't know, if have you chance to read a little bit? Can you respond a little bit to it?
Yes. I actually had I read what Mlondi has written. Quite impressive to see that. Well, we have researchers that are within the space or within the sector that we are discussing about today, which is more important because this discussion can also be furthered after this engagement. And one thing that I can attest to this, Mlondi, it is that recently Cyril Ramaphosa has just signed into law the revised electricity market structure, which is the grid code, which is something that he was recently done. And one thing that I can say it is that the reality it is to create a liberalized market in terms of the electricity structure and how how electricity market will be, more especially the wholesale electricity market. As you have mentioned, that there is more of the private sectors investing into this. But not only that, Eskom is already having plans into getting into that space where they will be investing into renewable energy. And this is basically some of the discussions that have been going on a couple of times for several times, to say that we do not want to exacerbate. I think when we started to say that the issue of inequality, we do not want to exacerbate, to say that the people that are or can afford these particular technologies are the ones who will be able to be selling the very same electricity to the poor. But then how does that the government come into that space to say that, wait a minute, how then do we get to seize the opportunity as well, just to participate within that, and the expansion of the grid, and ensuring that there is a protection in terms of the local industry and the jobs, something that is very important, that is being addressed by one of our the government department, which is the DTI in this particular case, just to understand how then do we localize the steel production and all sort of things. So these are policy and high policy questions that already have been are being dealt with. Some have been dealt with in some instances and in some sectors. And I believe that there is a lot of discussion that will come out of that, because we understand that as these particular industry, or maybe the expansion of the grid, will create some market in elsewhere, and the DTI and other the relevant government departments are pretty much doing great work in terms of understanding how this can be addressed. Yeah, but one thing that I can say it is that we have also ESCOM trying to also participate within that space of renewable energy. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And we're about to get close to the end. So I want to one last question from the audience that is relevant. I would like one answer from each of you of the panelists, and one sentence short. What policies or instruments have proven most effective at de-risking investments so private finance can scale in the global south? So what are policies that you are aware that work and in your context? So please, Philip.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So so thank you for your just to be sure I understood the question well. So is the person referring to, as in policies as in related to financing, or in terms of technology wise, in terms of
I think it's broader scope, thinking
kind of
of
broad?
what are
Okay.
like the elements that you need to ensure that private
Okay.
finance scale in the global south. So yeah.
Okay. So I think in the global south, one of the factors that probably constrains, private investment has always been the risk, factor, right? So as part of the financial arrangement, you would want to design financial instruments that, kind of take away, this kind of risk, for instance. So I know that blended finance has been one of the financing instrument that is actually helping, scale up, green transition specifically. And especially for those kind of investments where you also have some form of a credit, guarantee, that especially maybe from the IMF, from any of these multinational companies, that sometimes could also drive, private sector interest in terms of investing in green technologies. Yes. So I'll speak to those two issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Paseka, do you have any experience, policy or instrument that you think that has proven most effective on the risking private finance?
Yes. I think I mentioned it earlier on. Is the Climate Change Act? We see that when there is a policy, that's when you get to see the investors. They get to feel that there is a little bit more of a assurance, because there is something tangible that is of a policy in a particular space. So from our side, I can raise our climate change act of 2022 of 2024. It has been very, very instrumental, and all of the sections of the act will be promulgated. And I'm very, very fortunate to be one of the people that are championing or maybe even leading some of the implementation of the act, and it has been very instrumental from my perspective and from the experience. Thanks.
Thank you. And Shamin, I think that would be really useful for you. Lastly, Marcela, do you have any policy that you want to highlight?
Policy.
Or instrument that have
It's a
proven
hard.
most effective on de-risking investment?
The risking. I think what the panelists said is exactly that. I mean, is the what is called blended finance, but I think blended finance has a very big interpretation. Blended is not just a project. Blended is also thinking about different phases of what is needed. And I think the question I read it on the chat was, what is good in the risking, right? I think the risking are projects that are completely not of interest to. I think you have to see the transition to the energy transition as chain, right? It's a path. It's not something that occurs in the first thing. And when I was involved 2 years ago working with the South Africa government, the discussion was around there are investments that are needed. And I'm sorry, I was distracted because I was trying to find the example and I couldn't. But there were some investments that are absolutely essential, right? But they are not profitable, right? So the blended can also be the first phase. You can have the government funding that, and you can also apply to multilaterals. They have some funding for the risking, right? Specific guarantees, etc., etc. Make sure that these projects are implemented, and then as in a second phase involve. So the blended is also temporal, right? It's not just around the project. So that's what I can add.
Thank you, and thank you so much, and really appreciate of your time and your really insightful answers, and thank you for the people that join us. The questions were really interesting, and I was really happy that you were so engaged. We're coming to an end of our time, and I want to make sure we close well. First, again, sincere thank you for Marcela, Philip, and Paseka. And then I also want to thank Angela for hosting and all of you joining across Africa and beyond. Before we close, let me show you how you can stay connected with the Reset Network. You can become a member. Membership is open to individual researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. You can access working groups on energy modeling, economic analysis, and policy evaluation, as well as tools, training, small grants, and global peer network. Your organizations can also become partners, collaborating with the Reset on research, engagement, and capacity building. And the Reset Network is actively seeking funding support to expand these activities across the Global South. So please find everything at www.reset-network.org. You can also email us at info@reset-network.org and follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter. This recording of today's event will be available on the Reset Network website shortly. Thank you all, really. Thank you so much. And the energy transition in Africa will succeed where it's led by locals and by researchers and decision makers supported by the right tools, evidence, and international cooperation. That is actually what the Reset Network is here to do, and let's build it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.